We are licensed therapists, but we probably aren't your therapist. While we may share helpful information about mental health, it is best to form your individual care plan with your own mental health professional. If we are your therapist, hi. While this podcast shares nuggets of wisdom about mental health, we are sharing many pieces of who we are outside of the therapy room and doing a lot of yapping about nonsense, our own healing work, and some about sex and dating. If you feel listening to this podcast may interfere with your work in therapy, please refrain from doing so. While we're on the subject, any notes from our dating lives have been changed to protect the privacy of our partners and ourselves. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to the Healing Journey podcast. I'm Lindsay Camp, and this is a podcast where two therapist besties talk about their healing journeys and interview healers who have helped along the way. I'm joined today with my co-host, Ilyse Kennedy. She's a trauma therapist and owner of a group practice, Moving Parts Psychotherapy, where she's a supervisor for associates working toward licensure. She's the author of a greatly reviewed book, The Tender Parts, A Guide to Healing Trauma Through Internal Family Systems Therapy. She's a divorced queen who is a single mom to 3 amazing children. When she's not therapizing, she can be found at Barton Springs or at a local music venue. She's also my whimsical bestie, my work wife, an occasional roommate, the city mouse to my country mouse, and in the words of Victoria Gunvalson, the OG of the OC, my friend, my sister, my soulmate. Welcome, Ilyse.
Thank you.
Now, I want to orient us a bit with some of your own words about yourself.
Absolutely.
You pinned to paper a text to a male suitor that included the following description of yourself. Always up to some wacky spiritual shit that makes me sob as much as it makes me laugh.
Accurate.
Still true.
Still co-signing on that one. Yes.
Okay, so we can't talk about healing without talking about your book.
Fair.
Let's start there. Tell me about the origin of it. Tell us about the book.
Back in the day, I was a light mental health influencer on Instagram. I picked up a following in the midst of COVID when we were all wondering what the fuck was happening and latching on for anything we could. And people latched on to my Instagram. From there, I had gotten a few agents reaching out to me or publishing houses. And this gentleman really liked my brand. And he thought I could get some pen to paper and create a book. And so I wanted to write a book that was very trauma informed, because I feel like actually a lot of books on trauma, clients read them, but it kicks up their own trauma because the way that they're written, there's not enough care given to the people who will be reading them that maybe haven't done their own trauma work yet or don't have any container outside of the book. And we know that therapy is very expensive. And so I wanted to write a book that offered clients who maybe don't have the funds for therapy a contained way to start moving into working through trauma. And internal family systems has been a modality that's been really paramount to my work in therapy and my work with clients. It's this idea that we all have different parts of ourselves. And when we get to know those parts of ourselves better, we can be with them in order to heal them, and they relax back so they don't need to be as active. So like our depressive parts or our people-pleasing parts. And so that was sort of the concept of the book. That book also came out as my marriage was ending and was almost like a catalyst for the ending of my marriage. And so there's this double-sided thing where I experienced one of my biggest childhood dreams, which was to write a book, and such an important piece in my career. And it also pushed me into this next stage of life where I was ending my marriage.
I don't think I've told you this, but I was in Camilla's room the other day, your oldest daughter, and she was showing me some outfits she had put together. And there was this like tiny wedding dress in her closet I was like, what is this? And she's like, oh, that was for mom's book party that got canceled because of weather. And I was like, oh, it's so gorgeous. And I was thinking a lot about that. Yeah, that time. And you had, like, Max was, your youngest was also kind of in the mix of all of that. Like, you were writing the book, you were growing a baby. And then, yeah, thinking about how that was one of the parts too of things changing for you.
Yeah, I literally found out I was pregnant with my third child the day that I received my book contract to sign.
Right. That's right.
And I was devastated about the pregnancy because I didn't know how I was going to write this book alongside being pregnant, but it actually allowed my ADHD brain to fucking finish the manuscript in 9 months. I was working like up until I went to the hospital for labor. And I do not think that I could have gotten that book finished if I hadn't been pregnant and had like a serious deadline of like when that needed to be done. So that's a good ADHD hack. If you have to finish a project,
coincide it with a naturally occurring.
Yeah.
Totally.
Get pregnant.
Get pregnant. Totally. So 2 parts to this. One is that a lot of our healing this past year plus has been oriented around grief. The grief of your marriage, dreidel girl passing away, etc. What do you want to share off the top about your healing journey? Like where you are, what you're grieving, what you're healing? I know.
Woo.
Lay your cards down.
So I think there's not enough attention given to how much grief is wrapped up in ending a marriage. And I would not have known unless I experienced it myself. We don't give people permission to grieve a marriage or a relationship like we give people permission to grieve a death. And even when we give people permission to grieve a death, we don't give them enough permission.
It's a tiny little space.
Yeah. Even getting bereavement time off from work, it's such a minuscule time, but there's no bereavement time for divorce. Mm-hmm. And when you're grieving a divorce, you're not only grieving the relationship, you're grieving the vision that you had for your future. You're grieving the plans that you made. You're grieving the parts of yourself that grew up with this person, the parts of yourself that got into that relationship in the first place and maybe pushed past knowing it wasn't the right fit for you, but for whatever reason, staying in it. You're grieving if you have children or other people who might be affected. You're making a huge decision that uproots and changes the course of their lives. And you're grieving what their expectation was and the safety that their attachment systems latched onto within that relationship. And so I had experienced this depth of emotion like I never experienced before, even though I've been through plenty of traumas in my life. But this was very new to me. And I also had this professional persona of like being a very visual group practice owner. Like I'm the face of my practice. I have associates that depend on me. I had to keep the business running. And then there's the outward, like even further social media presence. And then the presence of putting out this book. Mm-hmm. And so there was some shame attached to having this outward persona and feeling like I was like my marriage failed and like I couldn't fix it. And I couldn't fix it enough for my kids. And I was going to be causing them this huge trauma when I'm a trauma therapist. And I know, and I've worked with children of divorce, both children and adults. And I know the deep impact that that has. So to make that decision for my own family was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I could put everything in place for them, like started them in therapy the second I knew that this was going to be coming.
Yeah.
So that they would have the support, but it doesn't protect them because they have to feel the feelings and the grief. And it didn't protect me with all my therapeutic support. I still had to feel the feelings and the grief. And when you're experiencing a type of pain that is completely new, you don't know what to latch on to. So I looked towards everything.
What did your eyes fall upon?
So my first endeavor actually connects probably back to the book and to the IFS community. I received an email about a grief retreat. I was completely dissociated. I signed right up. Then a few months later, as the date was coming up, and I forgot that I had made this commitment, and
like
probably
a
full weekend commitment. I must have put down over $500 to attend, but couldn't remember.
Totally.
Didn't know what a grief retreat was. No insight at all. As the date was approaching, I received an email with a supply list of what to bring, amongst which was comfortable clothes. If you want any snacks, like stuff would be provided. Bring your own drum.
That's right.
And I sent you a screenshot and you said, am I seeing this correctly? That it says bring your own drum?
Where are you going?
Yes. And
what are you doing?
I couldn't tell you. Now, what ended up transpiring at that first endeavor into alternate forms of healing. A grief retreat is quite beautiful, to be honest. This one was facilitated specifically for internal family systems therapists. So not only are you with a group of like semi-strangers, which by the way, a lot of them I did know from the IFS community. And I'm not going to speak to anybody's experience besides my own because what we witnessed and experienced is confidential to us.
Absolutely. In the cuddle puddle.
There was a cuddle puddle. Yes. Now, a grief retreat is, of course, appropriated from African tradition. There's a beautiful book that I came to know called The Wild Edge of Sorrow that promotes grief retreats because in grieving, we often, in like westernized culture, we leave people to grieve on their own. And so the idea is that when we offer a space for people to come and grieve, they're not doing it alone. They're doing it in community. This will sound nutty to outsiders, but it was really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of spaces like that, nor do we often seek those out. And so you bring items for an altar, and like people bring photos of their loved ones or photos and stuff that represent like the loss of their marriage or whatever they're grieving. Mm-hmm. And we oriented to the space, kind of shared why we were all there. There were some other people grieving divorce, so I wasn't the only one. And as the grief ritual starts, candles are lit, there's dark lighting, and you're literally just in this room for like 2 straight days. Not 2 continuous straight days. It was like a 9 to 5.
Okay.
Like food was offered and you could kind of like go out, but it's best not to eat because you might vomit.
Yeah.
And people did.
Yeah.
And drumming starts and people are sharing their grief stories, and then they're like wailing together. They're sobbing. They're holding each other. They're gathering in circle. For my particular ritual, there was a song that became like very important to me in my grieving process. Like music is very important to me in general in my grieving and everyday life. But there was a song that became very important to me in my grieving process. And so I shared that song and I asked if we could like gather in a circle so I could play it. I shared the story of like the dissolution of my marriage. I cried a little, but it was all so fresh that I was a bit dissociated and I couldn't fully like process the grief. Like I still felt it stuck, even though it felt really nice to be gathered like that. And then the person before me had ended in like a little Irish jig after they processed their grief. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know what? Mm-hmm. Like, I think we need to dance this out.
Let's move it through the body.
Let's move it through the body. And so once we played the sad song, I asked, is it possible to get a dance party going so that I can move this through? And the wonderful woman who was leading the retreat, Anne Cinco, said, absolutely. What is your divine feminine song? And I said, not appropriate for this venue. Now, I was the youngest amongst a group of therapists that were upwards of 60 and 70 years old.
Our favorite.
Yeah, mostly women.
Great.
And she insisted that we listen to my actual divine feminine song.
So what were we hitting play on?
We were hitting play on Hot Girl Summer. But first, she bathed me in the waters that were allegedly touched by Aphrodite. Like, sprinkled these waters on me. Uh-huh. And this circle, so the song started, they insisted on the unedited version, which I won't read the lyrics to. But you can imagine. I said, Hot Girl Summer by Megan Thee Stallion. That's with 2 E's. And the circle broke into dance. These women had never heard this song before.
No.
The men quickly removed themselves from the circle the first time they heard the P word. I won't say. They wanted us to have a safe space to gather. And honestly, it did a lot for me.
Absolutely. I'm laughing, but I also know that this was a very healing moment for you.
A very healing
moment.
Yes.
Okay, so you play Hot Girl Summer. You all dance and move. This beautiful divine feminine that you've connected with.
Sure.
And then I caught wind that you, at the end of that grief retreat, signed up for a second one.
So, yes. At the end of that, some people were asking, when can we do this again? And she kind of joked like, well, my next one's in Ireland. And I signed right up.
You sure did.
So
you sure did.
Yeah. A few months later, I was off to Ireland for more healing.
That one, I think I was pretty dissociated. And it like didn't fully register that you were like in Ireland.
Right.
Like the countryside of Ireland.
Yes.
Doing your grief work there.
Lots of healing work.
Lots of healing
the countryside of Ireland. Actually, like the second grief retreat, because I had done other healing along the way and I was more present and like back in my body. I still had like the music aspect. I had like made a little playlist to kind of accompany me and play in the background. And it did end with a great circle to Noah Kahan, which was very sweet.
Oh,
that one, I like really moved through some shit.
Yeah.
I like did like a guttural yell to like move through the rage pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most of the people had come from the US. And so we were all there specifically to like be with our grief. Like we had flown across the fucking world to be with our grief. And there were 3 of us with very parallel stories. And I think that was the most profound piece for me. Those 2 other people that had very similar stories to mine, and getting to hear that like this person was still a good parent, even though they knew they had to end their relationship. And this person is like still a really good therapist.
Yeah.
Even though they experienced a traumatic relationship.
Yeah.
it allowed me to like take in their stories and almost as if I was like witnessing myself.
Yeah.
And take that back as like, oh, this is how I see them. This is how I can see me.
Yeah.
And like those two people, we kind of gravitated towards each other to be accompanying in their grief ritual process. And that was really important and profound.
Yeah. That makes me think about how interwoven our grief and our healing journeys have been, and that there have been so many, like parallel processes there. Can you speak a little bit about, so this will be kind of like a 2-part, 1, our friendship, and then 2, like the convergence of our healing journeys and all that overlap.
I think a lot of people don't have friends that they meet in their 30s. Like I often hear people looking for friendship in their 30s. And I've felt very lucky to have experienced close friendships throughout my life. Like I have people that I've been with since elementary school. I have people that I've been with since college. And then I've been able to still continue to meet people in my 30s, which is really cool. And I recognize that so many people do not have that.
Yeah.
So it feels really special that I have you as a friend that I've met in this stage of life.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because in your 30s, a lot of people, like they're heavy on like raising their family or career. Like there's some really big parts that take up a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, when I became a mom, I also went through a big grieving process and I felt very isolated because I was the first of my friends to have a baby.
Uh-huh.
And so I was kind of used to having friendships with other people that didn't have young kids. I was also lucky to meet some people that did have young kids, but I didn't feel foreign to having friends that didn't have young kids. And I didn't stay attached to only having friends that had the same life as me. And I think
you don't give off playdate mom vibes.
Not quite. Not quite.
Yeah.
And it became really important for me as my kids were growing up. And I think being in grad school and holding my career as a therapist, like allowed me to continue to meet new people. But it became like paramount for me to like hold those dates with friends, to hold on to the parts of myself that are very easily lost through motherhood.
Yeah.
Motherhood is one of the most profound experiences of change we can go through. Like biologically, our brains just change. There are literally new attachment pathways formed in your brain from the first 2 weeks of gestation because of that profound change in biology and then that profound change in lifestyle. We can end up like burying the parts of ourselves that we had before we became mothers, and making friendship a priority as like self-care helped me to hold on to the parts of myself that it felt like I lost when I became a mother. They weren't gone. They were just like pushed more deeply down to protect them. Once I became divorced, I could like uncover those parts of myself and lean it back into my friendships in a different way, which was really important then for moving through the grief of divorce.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Will you introduce us to some names that we'll be hearing over our time together on this podcast? Can you just introduce the listeners to any players off the bat that were a piece of this? So I'm thinking about Anne. I'm thinking about, again, the Bandits. So kind of hit us with some of your top people that were with you walking through this process.
So I very quickly formed this support team for myself. I think it was just instinct of when you're a therapist that's going through a period of intense grief, it's like you have to have a grief first aid, because I took like 2 weeks off or something to move into my separation home, like my limbo home, I called it.
I called it something else.
Well, yes, that we won't share on the pod. But for this purpose, we'll call it my
Separation
limbo home.
Your limbo home.
Yeah. So I took 2 weeks off to orient to that, and like sort of recover. And then I very quickly formed a support team. Yes, our group text, which is made up of you and your best friend from high school, Marissa, and my best friend since I was 19, Alyssa, the Bandits. The Bandits is a space for everything from Bravo breaking news and the Housewives or whatever Andy Cohen throws our way to just like, I can't get out of bed today. And so that was really essential.
Because we really formed that during COVID. Like
Definitely.
we were in that group chat.
Yeah. So
Regularly.
during COVID, the group chat would get on Zoom and watch episodes of Bravo together.
Sometimes in costume.
Sometimes in costume.
Sometimes in costume.
And honestly, like, I think that was a time where we really solidified how important it is to find community, because everyone was literally isolated.
Yeah.
And we were reaching for what we could. But yeah, so we've got the Bandits on the support team. My therapist, Anne, has been paramount. I started seeing her after the birth of my second child. And so she has been a player for quite some time. She is a very wonderful, non-judgmental space for both the hinged and processing the trauma. And she never makes a negative comment about the unhinged and will encourage, like, absolutely, get on that plane to Ireland. No questions asked. I came into contact with my aerial instructor, Carrie, who ended up being really essential for my team of healers. She works out of a studio called Blue Lapis Light here in town. I wanted to do something that was a hobby that I had no skin in the game for. Like, it literally had nothing to do with my career in any way.
Yeah.
And it was just about being in my body.
Yeah.
And I will never be a professional aerialist. I have weak arms.
You have a weak upper body.
I have a weak upper body, but I built a lot of strength.
Yeah.
And I got to do some cool things. Yeah. And what we found in my aerial work was that when Carrie allows me to yap and gossip during my sessions, I trick myself into doing very scary things that I don't even notice I'm doing because I'm gossiping. So that was cool. And I did build a lot of strength. And Carrie became a very dear friend as well.
Yeah.
And then there's my personal trainer, Jacob, at Lunar Health Coaching, also here in Austin. Same
Phenomenal.
thing.
I've joined you in on sessions.
Yes,
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal. I've never experienced a personal trainer that allows the client to lead in talking about body. So he's never mentioned anything about weight loss. He asks me my goals first, and I've taken weight loss like out of that language.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was about building strength.
Yeah.
And then we do some martial arts. And the biggest piece of that is that he has always had a trauma-informed approach. So everything is with consent. And he's become like a very safe man in my life. And to be able to do like martial arts with a safe man moved a lot of my trauma from men through my body. So he's also one of the players. And then we've got Tara, our psychic, Andres, an intuitive plant healer. I've done some personal work with, but also a very dear friend. He has this magical connection with nature and plants and such a gift. And he's been such a gift in my life as a friend as well. And then I also joined a process group therapy for therapists. So you may hear about my group therapist, Catherine Barnhill. She's also been a player.
Do you want to speak at all about the ketamine?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. So in my healing first aid, I knew that I was giving Anne, my therapist, some bullshit, and I was not getting to the depths. We spent a few too many sessions spiraling about men that were going to pass away within a few weeks. Not literally pass away, but, faded out. Sure. That was all distraction from the inner work that I really needed to be doing. Yeah. I really wasn't getting down to it. And I was coming into contact with, honestly, like a lot of my attachment wounds that got not kicked up by the dissolution of my marriage, but got kicked up because I had never dated before.
Yeah.
Like, I had been in that relationship since I was 22. I had never been on a dating app, and I was not used to this new culture of dating. And so it kicked up attachment wounds in such a jarring way and opened up so much of my shit that I had to turn to psychedelic drugs to process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I also, as a therapist, I do not recommend healing modalities that I haven't experienced myself. And I knew I was a little hesitant about psychedelics for clients because I've experienced some clients that have done psychedelic journeys that have taken them too far into the depths with no containment.
Yeah.
And then I'm doing the repair work for a mushroom journey that they've done with somebody who claims to be a shaman, but it's just a white woman with crystals who hasn't actually trained in taking people on mushroom journeys.
Sure. The audacity.
So I went to a ketamine clinic. I knew I wanted to do my sessions with a therapist. There's an option to do sessions on your own or with a therapist. I knew that being a trauma therapist myself, we should be accompanied when we're moving towards trauma. And weirdly, my ketamine therapist, Hannah, we looked alike. We had the same glasses. We dressed kind of the same, and she was around the same age as me. So that was a little jarring. But she was wonderful. So wonderful.
We love you, Hannah.
Yeah. And so Hannah is just with me the whole time. We start with a meditation, and I can bring in my intentions for the journey, and then bring in sometimes I would have a poem that I wanted to read beforehand and stuff like that. The really cool thing about ketamine that I experienced, and I have seen with clients, because we do have a ketamine therapist at my practice too. And so I collaborate with them for my own clients. The first session really felt like a containment session where I was witnessing Beyonce and Taylor Swift hugging. And I was like, yes, Beyonce is mother. And it was just like whimsical. At that time, we had recently had like that iconic episode of The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, with Reality Von Teese.
Oh.
Where there was the meme of Meredith from The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. There was this meme with Meredith's hair like blowing in front of her, but it was that with the cover of Lana Del Rey's album, Norman fucking Rockwell. And that meme like floated by in the session.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like delighting in it.
Of course.
And after the session, I was like, okay, that felt like I didn't do much work. But what I realized after was like, those are the things that genuinely bring me delight.
Yeah.
And sometimes I laugh about them or I really make fun of myself for them. But I was like, oh, like I was showing myself the things that contain me and ground me and that just are silly. And then it started to get fucking real. Where in the second session, like I was dropped into my trauma. But what I saw was I was like experiencing my trauma at a safe distance. So I was reprocessing and like seeing where some of my attachment wounding came from that I had never recognized before, or things that I didn't even find that I wouldn't have pinned as traumatic in my life. And then I was like, oh, that's why it's scary to be alone. Like, oh, that's why sometimes you struggle with not leading with your sexuality, pieces like that. And then you can go back for re-ups after you complete the sessions. And so sometimes I do go back for re-ups because it keeps me off the antidepressants, to be honest. So the re-ups I'll do like with just a nurse and not with a therapist, but like Hannah sort of became a part of my inner community. So like I can feel her with me, or I prepare with my therapist that I typically go to, Anne.
Yeah. Something that you said made me think about how with a divorce, with a breakup, even with a death and the complicated like relationships that preceded it, how at the termination of it, there's, for some of us, a defense response to like point the finger. And it sounds like what you were doing is taking the opportunity to like really turn the mirror and to like acknowledge like the fucked up shit of your marriage, but also like looking at how you got there.
I think this brings to mind like bringing back how our friendship comes into play.
Do it.
After you experienced the death of your mom and we were both like dropped into a space of grief together, we started giving each other permission for like the very unhinged healing shit we were doing. And then giving each other permission for like going into the depths with our healing work, or for like having a day where you can't get out of bed. And I think I needed you to accompany me in that process to give permission for all of those pieces to show up together.
Yeah.
Like when I told my dad, like I needed to be at the Eras tour
3 times.
Yes, but the first time that I had to be at the Eras tour in Houston or Dallas because I needed that to process my divorce, like no questions asked. I made it. Yeah, I was there. It was rare. I was there. And then when I had to come to terms again with that wasn't quite enough. I'm going to have to go to London. I'm going to have to go to London on my birthday. And
again.
Yeah, again.
Need it. We needed a re-up.
See the Eras tour for the 3rd time. That time got me. I healed a lot. I healed a lot. But you never questioned it. There were times that maybe somebody could have sent up a flag. But usually it was just turning towards all of the messiness with acceptance. And I think that's been such an important piece of my own grieving and healing process.
Yeah. I'm with you in that. So these parts that are kind of surprising about or different or new that felt really healing, like people being fully supportive, et cetera, et cetera. What else surprised you about your healing journey? What surprised you about yourself? What surprised you about like the process? Like, what did you not know before you were in it?
I didn't know I would be able to return to myself in this way.
Oh,
I think.
yeah, because like when this bad shit happens, it feels like it just propels you into this like whole other dimension that feels so far away from yourself. But yeah.
I thought as I've changed and evolved, parts of me have left. But I've been able to reconnect with myself to become more fully who I am and hold so much more acceptance for who I am. And that was very unexpected, as well as like how healing certain things can be that that we wouldn't consider to be catalysts for healing, like
Getting about your baths.
My baths. Yes.
Thinking about your baths.
My baths are very healing. My grief baths.
Tell us, what's a grief bath?
So I started taking these baths during the day, at night, sometimes 2 in one day. Mm-hmm. Water comes up as a symbol a lot to move through emotions and be with your emotions. And a bath also feels very contained. Mm-hmm. And so my baths are very specific, where we've got the bubbles going. There's a galaxy light that's come into the picture because
Absolutely.
You have to have the right lighting, poetry or a book, and then the music has to be right. So right for like honestly a year, it's been the John Vincent III album. That's been, but there were like, when the Tortured Poets department came out, I was taking like 2 to 3 hour baths listening to the full album and crying. Mm-hmm. But it moved a lot through. The other body of water that became very healing was Barton Springs, which is like a very sacred space for Austin. It's a very like community driven space. If you go often enough, which unfortunately I have, you see the same people all the time. And it's just such a special body of water, and it does a lot for your nervous system regulation. It did a lot for me, like coming back into my body.
I believe you coined the term ass out.
I wasn't going to say that in this venue, but yes, the Barton Springs excursions were called ass out at Barton Springs. But as a therapist in the community,
Healing Waters is what we're going with.
We're going with Healing Waters.
I would also, this seems like a good place to make the disclaimer that all the names of people from the apps, all of the people from our dating world that we'll be touching on briefly, perhaps, all of our work with clients, all of those names have been changed and the stories blended to protect identities and confidentiality.
Thank you for saying that. Absolutely.
That feels important.
Yes.
Feels important to note. Okay. As we start landing this plane, you talked about the waters, your team. Give me a rapid fire, like your grieving necessities. Like what could you not have done this healing journey of grief without?
Okay. Rapid fire off the top. The waters, candles, David White, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Noah Kahan, Gracie Abrams. God, I almost forgot. Tree time. Mushrooms. Friendships. Mm-hmm. The Real Housewives. Every franchise.
City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's my rapid fire.
Okay. I've got 2 more for you.
All right. Name them.
What do you feel like you healed in the year of our Lord 2024? And what are you going to be healing in 2025?
So 2024, even though it wasn't like the year of my divorce, was like one of the hardest years I've experienced in a long time for everything. And it ended with like literally my body almost shutting down on me. Mm-hmm. And so I've said like 2024 was literally the year of surviving. and 2025 is the year of thriving. So it's just feeling like I have a lot more clarity and presence going into this next year. And like, I'm fucking ready.
I love it. I love it. Okay, to wrap, marry, fuck, kill. Therapy, essentially Anne. Baths and the cards.
Oh God.
I hate to do it to you.
Honestly, like I would kill the cards.
Okay.
I would marry the bath and Anne because I can't even say the words that I would fuck Anne. That's not ethical. And it's like,
it doesn't roll off the tongue.
It doesn't roll off the tongue. And Anne, if you hear this, I apologize for even putting that in a sentence together.
So sorry, Anne. So sorry, Anne. Okay. Okay.
And Anne would never, ever, ever, ever do that or suggest it with a client. So I'm sorry to have brought that to this space.
I brought it to this.
You brought it to the space.
I'm sorry too. Okay. Well, that is a wrap for us today. Thank you, Ilyse.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and consider leaving a review. If you have already, thank you. You can find us on all socials at The Healing Journey. You can find us online at www.thehealingjourney.com, and you can shoot us an email at thehealingjourney@gmail.com. Talk soon.